Hello and welcome to this demonstration of advanced in-page analytics. We're going to be looking at cxOverstat, which is part of the Tealeaf suite of customer analytics technologies, and in particular this functionality is useful for organizations that have a lot of online activity around form filling, a lot of navigation and search, where you're particularly interested in the user journeys and how you can understand what causes abandonment, where it occurs, not just at a page level, but for example at a form field level or at a link level. So what we're going to do is start off with the standard Tealeaf reporting dashboard, which could be configured pretty much for any area of the business. In this case, you can see some examples. We're tracking things like failed logins, error messages that might have popped up, promotion codes not accepted, for example, in a retail context. We have usability issues, could be on a mobile application, could be on a desktop site, things like dwell times and so on. Voice of the customer feedback if we're seeing any negative spikes or anything we need to be aware of. This top level dashboard is a way of surfacing those issues to the right people in real time so that actions can be taken. And as you'll see here, we have a kind of an area where we can track any particular metric we're interested in, any key KPI. So in this case, we're looking at an example of an auto insurance company, a motor insurance company, that are obviously trying to get online quotes through the system in order to provide those insurance services to vehicle owners. Now what we can see here is that we can set up a sort of conversion baseline, what we expect in terms of in-funnel conversion when people come on and try to get a quote, how many people will get through to the end of that process. So you can see that we can track that, and we can set up bandings to say if we're going outside of tolerance, if for example we're 5% lower than normal, we can create alerts and send it to the right people. This is particularly useful for situations where we want to understand abandonment in real time, where people are struggling to get through a form process, where we're getting lots and lots of visitors, so we can aggregate problems very quickly and surface them into this dashboard and then do something about it. So this is our high level starting point. But what we're interested in is anything that really rings alarm bells, and here you can see that we have set up what's called top movers. Top movers are self-referencing KPIs that look at their sales against a previous period of time. It could be the previous hour, the previous day, the previous week, or even a day on a week, a Tuesday for example. So we're really interested in tracking how is my application or my site performing right now against a given benchmark. And you can see here that in terms of the acquisition struggle, auto quote, we're looking at a problem here where people are trying to get through the quote process and they're failing to. So this is a key KPI that we set up to track, and what we're seeing here is that 4.25 times more people than normal are struggling to get through this quote process for their motor insurance. So this is definitely worth the investigation. And in traditional analytics you'd kind of know how many people might have abandoned and where they've abandoned, but you wouldn't necessarily know why. So our goal from here is to understand why people are abandoning this form filling process. And this is particularly useful for things like government, where there is an awful lot of form filling online and where the goal is to try and reduce calls into the call center, for example. So if we drill down on this high level KPI here, we get into what's called the dynamic report builder, and you can see here just a sort of representation of that particular KPI. And as I said earlier, we've got 4 times more people struggling to get through the quote process. So we can drill down on this and then look at it in a little bit more detail. We can see, for example, on the 8th of March here, we've got a situation where in the early part of the day, more and more people are struggling to get through the auto quote process. So we've got a trending problem that we need to get on top of quite early, because it could be significant amounts of quotation and dollars that are going missing. So what we can do in this dynamic report builder is start to understand the extent of the problem and quantify it. We move customer over here and we move the success dimension into the y-axis, and basically what we're doing here is looking at how many of these people that were struggling actually were still able to get through to the end of the process. And you can see there's a very small amount here. Those in blue were still able to fight through and get the quote done, but the majority in orange weren't. So we know we've got a problem that's trending that we need to be looking at. And at this point we don't understand what it is. What we can do is, as a first port of call, look at our existing errors that we're tracking, or some of them, and see, is this something we know about? So for example, we have a global error page, we have slow response times, status error codes, and so on. But we can see that none of these are the major contributor to this spike in kind of struggle and abandonment. we see that it's an unknown obstacle that we're looking at. So we know by looking down here in the table that we've got some 749 sessions or users that have tried to get through this auto quote process and failed. So we know it from a kind of session level. What we can also do in financial terms is say, okay, what does that mean to me in terms of financials? So instead of 749 sessions, what's the dollar amount associated with the potential quotes that these people could have processed? And you see if we change that to sum instead of count, we get $394,000 worth of quotes gone begging during that period at the start of the day, as you saw ramping up towards 9 AM. So it's definitely something we need to get on top of, because this is potential business that we're losing. And if you can imagine it in a government context, for example, it could be something like self-assessment forms that are being filled in, new tax discs on the DVLA site, for example, any number of different scenarios where people are trying to get through to the end of a process but failing. So what we want to be able to do is drill down and not just know that people have abandoned and quantify that. We actually want to qualitatively see what's going on. So if we click on that number here, we see that our 749 sessions are here again, but now we've got an individual reading line by line of each user that abandoned during that process of trying to get the quote through. And you can see we've already got some useful information, such as when the session started, some of the events leading up to their abandonment, who they were, and what sort of product they were after. So we can see this can be configured pretty much for any type of information that you want. It can be very technically focused, it could be marketing related around campaign codes, it could be anything you want really. But what we're really trying to do at this point is start looking at some of these sessions. We know we've got an aggregated problem where abandonment's occurring, but we don't really understand why. So what we can do is just pick one of these sessions by clicking this camera icon here and go into replay mode. And what you can see now is a complete replay of the user's experience from end to end and how they interacted with the interface. And you can see anything in green that's highlighted is where they have actually clicked or moved the cursor. So you can see they've selected insurance for a quote, and we're going to move through now and see their experience from end to end. So they select auto insurance, everything's fine at this stage, put in some address details, select auto insurance, start putting in personal details. So you can see in green here because that's what signifies someone has interacted with the interface. Click continue, everything's fine at this point, vehicle details. Now we get into an area where problems can start to arise. So this person puts in their address and they click continue, thinking, well, that's fine, that's my right address. But they get an error message saying address may only contain letters, numbers, and the following special characters: hash, at, and period. They look down at their address and they see, well, I've got, you know, everything that's legal here. Commas are legal. After my ST I've got a comma, but commas are legal. Now this is where the confusion lied, because actually commas were not legal. They were just separating the characters that were legal. So this person gets into a little bit of struggle at this point, changes their address into uppercase to see if that makes any difference. No difference at all, still gets the error message. So we can see some confusion starting to arise. So we will already start to lose some people in terms of abandonment at this point. Tries again, puts it back into lowercase, gets nowhere. So it's basically blocked out at this point, same error message, and we've got abandonment occurring. Now in traditional analytics world, if it's Google Analytics or something like that, you would know a certain percentage of people are abandoning at this point. And that's about as far as you would get in terms of understanding why they abandoned. You wouldn't be able to link the fact that it was this comma separation issue here with this error message. But what we can do in Tealeaf to understand that and actually prove it is to start looking at some different types of overlays. So the first ones we'll look at is a heat map. Now this gives you some basic information around where people are clicking on a page. Now heat map technology is old hat to an extent. There's a lot of people out there providing this sort of technology. Nothing new there. But what is new is the ability to individually drill down on these areas and look at people at an individual level in terms of what they were trying to do. So we can see here that a lot of people are actually clicking on the error message thinking it might be a link. Some people are contacting us. You know, if you're a government organization, you're interested to know why people call into the call center, how can we reduce those numbers of calls in. But what we can do with Tealeaf that is unique in terms of being able to understand issues is to put some overlays in place which look at these individual hotspots. So if we put this overlay over this particular hotspot, we can see that 997 users have actually clicked on this point. And so during that time period we looked at the start of the day, a lot of people seem to be getting this address confusion issue. We can expand that out and get what's called a field abandonment report, and these are all of those people that basically clicked on that hotspot. So we now have a unique session list of users that clicked on that particular point that we can start exploring a bit further and go down to the next level. So we select a user again for replay using our camera icon, and we can look at some other areas of their experience to try and understand what caused them to abandon. One of the key things that's very useful for insurance companies, banks, and government institutions is to look at what happened at a form field level. Now remember, in traditional analytics world, you will have had to tag up absolutely everything, every form field, if you want to know what's going on, adding huge overhead to your site. In this case you don't. We basically get a complete visual view of what people did on each field. And for example, dwell times can be indicative of struggle. If you've got a field that's taking longer to fill in than others, or longer than it should in terms of target metrics, you can say, well, you know, that could be a source of struggle. And we can see here that the address field is taking 13 seconds in terms of dwell. But that's not necessarily going to tell us what went on, because people could be doing anything, making a cup of tea, going off, doing something else. So dwell time is not necessarily going to give us the full view. But what is extremely interesting is looking at where people drop off in this form filling exercise. And we can see here that between putting in last name and between them putting in their address, 30% of our people are dropping off. So we've got a 45% abandonment rate at the address field level, which is really significant and way too large. So there's definitely an issue here, and it could be leading us to suspect our problem that we identified around commas and which characters are allowed. But what we can do again here is say, okay, I want to take this to the next level of detail, drill down on the address field, and actually see a field abandonment report for that also. So now we're going to get people that clicked on the error message from the heat spot. We know they abandoned at the address field level, and let's see what occurred. So now we can see our complete list of people matching that criteria. So you can see a lot of people are struggling with this particular address field, but we don't necessarily know how many people suffered with the exact same problem of our friend with the comma. But what we can do is do a search. So we can set up a search now and try and replicate the scenario that we saw with our user who was jumping around with the address field with commas and lowercase and uppercase and so on, and see if we can create a view across our entire session base. So everybody that came onto our site in that time period we were looking at, how many of those people suffered similar problems. So we look at some predefined events. So we've got acquisition struggle in the auto quote process. So this is something we predefined in terms of people not getting through the process efficiently. Secondly, we're looking for people that failed. So we're looking for those that were unsuccessful. So we put a success dimension of no, which means they were unable to get through the quote process. And finally, we put in the error message that they saw. So in Tealeaf, you can put in any type of parameter that will be captured within any session that it appeared in. So for example, now what we've got is address may only contain letters and numbers. This is the message that our users saw, and we're going to see exactly how many users suffered this exact same problem. And here you can see the full list. So we've got 748 users that were trying to put their address in and failed, which is highly indicative that that's the problem within our form. And we need to look at the error messaging. It was confusing, so it wasn't particularly clear with the commas separating the allowable characters. We can go away and fix that. And by the way, at the same time, we can say, well, who were these affected individuals? If we know who they are and they're authenticated, we can open this in an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF, whatever we want to format we want it, and then we can go after these people. For example, in this context of auto insurance, we could call them up almost within real time or a few minutes later and say, hey, sorry, see you were trying to get through the quote process. We believe there was an issue around the address field. Let's manage that for you. Process their quote online and recover that business. And if you think of it in a government context, you would be creating alerts for things like, you know, self-assessment, tax, DVLAs type services, could even be passport, online passports or visas, people trying to do things online where you can aggregate up those issues in real time and recover that situation. And in many different stages resolve the issue. One, the IT team can go and fix the issue. Marketing and e-commerce can understand the impact on the commercials and so on. And also customer support can go and recover those customers. So there's multiple things that can happen much closer to real time than kind of sitting around at the end of the week and having an analysis of what went on our site, you know, what's conversion rate at and so on and so forth. So it's kind of a real time way of looking really in-depth in-page analytics, and that's cxOverstat. There are many other parts of Overstat which I haven't covered in this short demonstration, things like link analytics, hover analytics, where you can actually see where people are hovering before they even click the page. You can see the links that are most commonly used, where people are abandoning once they've clicked. So there's a lot of rich data to be had from cxOverstat. I hope that demonstration was useful. This is Paul Cotton from K2uno. Thank you.